get them in. Now, right now, I am joined in studio by Monicah Wamuchiru. I promised you earlier conversation on the finance bill and the budget and how it is relevant to you as a Kenyan. So far, where we are, how is it relevant to you? What changes can you make? And how is this conversation important to you? So once again, I will allow Monicah to introduce herself so that she can tell us what she does and how important is this conversation to her.
Hello, Sylvia. Thank you for having me. I am in finance. That is my profession. I love talking about things that um, affect Kenyan people, and that's why primarily I'm here. I love to give insights about the finance bill, about the budget. Kenyans need to know what's happening in their country. They need to be very aware of the policies that are being passed, the laws that are being passed. They need to judge, to discern and say, is it right for us? Should we voice out our concerns? Should this change? How will this affect my business? How will this affect my life? How can I take advantage of whatever is being done? So that's why I'm here, and thank you for having me again.
Looking at the finance bill 2025-2026, last year we didn't have confidence in the finance bill because we thought that, especially the members of parliament, we thought that they were not listening to us. And this time we have had a situation where there has been public participation. What do you make of the process that has happened, especially when there is a meeting, so that there is a meeting to plan on how the meeting on public participation will be conducted. And then when the meeting is conducted, there are minutes written on how the meeting went, so that, a meeting to plan for a meeting, a long process. Do you think this inspired confidence in Kenyans, especially now that we've not had so much opposition to the finance bill? Because compared to last year, we really had opposition, like real opposition. You could enter anywhere and someone tells you reject. That was the whole conversation. But this year, we've not had so much reactions on it, so much negative comments. Until right now, the finance bill is already passed in parliament and it's now awaiting us. And so what do you make of the confidence Kenyans have to this current finance bill?
Okay, for the meetings, to plan a meeting, government is full of red tape. That is something we've seen since it's just been like that. It doesn't work as efficient as we wish for it to work. But focusing on the finance bill and the reaction of Kenyans this time, well, the finance bill was a bit conservative if we compare it to the 2024 bill, where there was in 2024 a lot of taxes had been introduced, and Kenyans are really not ready to bear this burden. And for once, we saw that Kenyans actually follow through with, if we say no, we really do mean a no, and there's potential to follow that through. We saw that during the presentations with the Finance and Planning Committee, both last year and this year. So this year, I believe the process was a lot more open. Let's start with, you could submit your written submit. Any individual could submit the written proposals or objections and send it to those QR code. We'll just send it. That was really good. They went to the counties, not all the counties though. I think because they had time, I was not on their side. At least they went to the counties. You could see a number of associations from the private sector that came in, tax experts that came in to talk about their views and proposals. So that helps. But mostly what eased off the anger in Kenya is the bill itself was conservative in the sense of it did not aim to introduce new taxes. The aim was just to seal the loopholes, and with the already existing taxes, how do we broaden the tax base? Not an introduction of a new tax, not an increase in the rate of an existing tax, just sealing the loopholes and broadening the tax base. And that helped a bit.
Now that you're still on the conversation on sealing loopholes and broadening tax base, it is a good, from where I sit, I see it's a good idea theoretically because if, for example, let's take the example of getting goods like the pharmaceuticals from zero rated to exempt. It looks like it looks like a good thing. Like, why would you uh, forgo like 500 billion if you take look at it cumulatively, like 500 billion for the exempt, like excluding or giving incentives to those companies to encourage them to produce, that the country will be losing around, let's say, 500 billion. So getting that money and investing it into other areas like, let's say, manufacturing industry sounds like a good investment because if I'm given uh, the exempt of 16% maybe on my local production, the goods I assemble, it may not necessarily encourage me to venture into that business. So in as much as we look at it as it's good theoretically, but if we look at it in a good way, okay, as Ramacho and Daddy, let me use that word, all these taxes will be passed to the consumer. So do you think it is something that it is really achievable, or it's just something that it's giving more burden, especially to the common mwananchi?
Alright, two sides of the coin. Definitely giving more burden to the consumer. And then, but what the government is trying to do, or KRA is trying to, there's been a headache on VAT refunds and claims. Because if a commodity is zero rated, that means I can't claim. And so KRA has had the headache of dealing with people claiming back. So KRA owes people refunds. And now, because the goal again of the finance bill was to streamline tax procedures, tax collection. So sort of that was the goal, as much as the consumer will feel the pain. So it's trying to streamline the tax procedures, but at the cost of the consumer. So, the VAT regime in Kenya is quite unstable. It changes. I don't think a tax regime should be subject to change and revisions, especially major revisions year on year. Something like VAT, if we can just simplify it and make it say all imported, no, or all exported goods or services are zero rated, everything else it will be standard. But then what you do so that you cover the consumer is reduce the VAT rate, 16 to something lower, 10, 8, streamline the whole thing so that carrier does not have to deal with the headache of VAT refunds. This good is zero rated, this one is standard, and then have to revise that year on year. At this point, I'm sure even accountants are having a hard time keeping up with what is standard rated and what is zero rated. Keeps on changing year after year. So that's what challenges our VAT regime, the unpredictability. It is so dynamic, which then does not help with planning processes. It does also not help with KRA, because KRA has to put in infrastructure systems that costs money. It increases administrative expenses for the agency. Instead of simplifying the system to a point where administrative costs or cost of collecting tax or revenue goes down, so that it can be more efficient and the tax regime can be more understood. Therefore, more people will comply. At this point, you can find yourself in non-compliance simply because you don't even know what falls where.
We shall be talking about the cost of compliance later. But there's this proposal of increasing the amount of time where KRA needs to do, all the audits and finalize your refund from 90 days to 120 days. There's that aspect also, but there's also this aspect. You've talked about the unpredictability of VAT in Kenya. How do you think that is affecting, especially foreign investors from coming in our country?
Well, not just VAT, the entire tax regime. When an investor is coming, part of the planning processes is tax planning. how do I forecast my cash flows. I have to give a cash flow forecast for a very long period of time. What deductions am I getting? Again, there's also how competitive is Kenya in terms of an investor is looking Kenya versus Rwanda versus Uganda. It's not the time when we were there. We are not going to
Economic
Kenya.
hub.
No, no. We have real competition right now. So, how competitive are we? Is the investor getting good deductions? Is the corporate tax competitive? If they're going to invest in a couple of billion shillings over a couple of years, um, how will their bottom line look like? Will they dispense so much in tax, both if they are incorporated in Kenya or not incorporated in Kenya but having significant presence in Kenya? So all these things they look into, so there is unpredictability, which makes planning difficult, and then competitiveness in the region. If our tax regime is not very good, then other countries like Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda especially will be us to, yeah, investors will take more of their FDI there. So those are things that the government should look at, especially now that it's having liquidity problems. It's not able to raise money for itself. So then how does it raise money? It should do the best it can to ensure that people bring in their money. Yeah. So it should at least make the tax climate as stable as possible, so that I'm bringing in my money. I can say for the next 5 years I expect XYZ, and then I can say Kenya is the best because I'm getting, it's almost like a special economic zone. I'm getting tax incentives. What am I getting from Nairobi that I can't get in Kigali or Kampala? So things like those. Yeah.
Now, let me bring you back to the cost of compliance, because as we see it, complying with the tax regulations of our country currently is complicated, because, for example, you signed you took tender, and then wananchi wa kawaida, let me bring it this way, it's even hard for those who are in corporate spaces who are elite to file their own taxes. It's hard for them. They have to get someone to do it for them. Now, let's take a look at a bigger company. It's already a problem for someone who is going to school. Now, we have a bigger company which has, they have incentives, they have to claim, from KRA and all that. They cannot do it for themselves, so they have to go, to KRA offices to get the certificates. And there's all these complications in the process. You spend to file your returns, and at the end of the day, you're like, why am I spending to file my returns? So, what do you make of the current cost of compliance, especially now that it is so complicated? I mean, it should just be like, you are filing your tax, all things are done for you, press A, like very easy for you. What do you make of this right now?
Well, let's look at corporate versus individual. So corporate, fine, they're certain, they have professionals, trained, good auditors, accountants, they get the gist. When it comes to individual returns, and this is where maybe KRA should really focus when it comes to broadening tax base. And I mean SMEs, like the really micro, the medium, they can go the corporate way because they have, I believe, access to capital to afford a professional. But when it comes to individuals and small, and these are the vast groups, because these are the ones who will file nil, like nil, yeah, yeah, out, and they have an income. I mean, they do have an income. So these ones are the ones that I think KRA should focus on and make the process of tax compliance very easy. I think the infrastructure is already there. Maybe develop or the ATM systems a lot more, make it available on USSD, right? Like really simple, the way off the back of my head I know how I can buy credit, how I can call customer care. Let it be as simple as that. I just input my income and then come up. They can use turnover tax or whatever tax. Let me say whatever. Again, do not complicate it. Let it be one standard tax with one standard rate. Because now if you start saying below this, over this, you go here, go there. Nobody will follow through with that. Yeah. So if you can come up with a blanket tax, an easy way where even a Mama Mboga can use a Kabambe phone, don't have to log on to an online platform. Most of them do not know iTax, and that is apparently where you're supposed to file even your individual returns. How will you do that? Even businesses that do not supply buttable goods or are not qualified to pay VAT, how do you incorporate them into the tax bracket? A simple system with a blanket rate. Kila mtu anajua ni 1%. But by the way, all of us know 10%. You know, something like that. Not complicated, not a high rate. Don't give me a percentage that will go back to the street. Don't give, don't make the tax procedure hard. Let the farmer also be able to do it. Yeah. After all, it's our country. We're not saying we do not want to pay tax. That's not what Kenyans are saying. Kenyans are mostly angry about we pay tax and then you misuse them. That's actually like the really big pain point for Kenyans. Pay tax, you misuse them, and then you come and ask me to fund you again for your private things, because literally when you misuse the tax, I'm funding your lifestyle and all. So that's where the pain point is. But if I pay tax and I'm saying, you know, the road outside my house is done, and hospital, medicine, I don't see pictures of kids in school under trees, somehow I won't be so angry. But right now, even if you introduce that tax, perhaps, or still Kenyans would be angry because the leadership has not earned accountability and trust. So maybe that's why Treasury and KRA and Parliament are also very hesitant to try and say, let the Mama Mboga come into the tax bracket. As I know, the country will erupt.
Going to be hard.
Yeah. But you see, that comes from a history, a background of these taxes are not being well managed. So that Kenyans are unpatriotic. No, we are patriotic. We get our problems. We know our problems. We know we need to fund. We know we have a booming population. We know we have, with our booming population, we know our infrastructure is not up to date. We need to update our infrastructure that makes ours to meet the world class, because the ones we constructed 30 years ago are out of 60 years ago are out of, they're not world class anymore. We are competing in the region to maintain our status. We get our problems, and we know we need money to solve these problems. It's just that with what we have given you already, you have mismanaged it so badly. There's no way I'm giving you another set of my money. That is the problem.
I heard someone say that in Kenya, we don't have money problem, we have spending problem. And now that we are talking about that, let's talk about our budget. If we just take an overview of our budget, we have budget was presented, I think 3 weeks ago, of 4.2 trillion.
Yeah.
And our collection is at 3.32 trillion. That means we have a deficit of around almost 1 billion.
Yeah.
And in that, we expected to get, foreign borrowing to fund our budget. And as we're talking about our budget, there is also our debt that is at 11 trillion shillings. And what's in the our collection in the 3.32 trillion that we are collecting, 1 trillion is already going in payment of interest of our debts. So we are left with around 2 trillion to fund a 4.2 budget. That means we are supposed to be borrowing also. Now, I want you to give us the whole perspective of this, how it's affecting our country, because as Kenyans, one, we will be competing with the government in terms of borrowing internal loans, because around 800 billion is expected to be coming from, local local market or local lenders. And then we have the 300 billion, which is expected to be coming externally. But now let's talk about this. How is this affecting us as a country in terms of living within our means and also supporting development in terms of allowing the public to freely, I mean, ukienda bank usiambiwe wewe ngoja kwanza, because government loans, if I give my loan to the government, it's secure, watarudisha with good interest. Now wewe sasa ngoja kidogo. So there is that balance when it comes to living within our means. What do you make about our current budget, our allocations, all this summed up together?
Right. I don't think Kenyans understand the term living within our means. Okay, scratch that, not Kenyans. Perhaps I should say Parliament or the Treasury. When I saw the finance bill and I saw it's not trying to raise revenue, no introduction of new taxes, I thought the budget this year must be very, conservative. Until I saw the budget and it was the most ambitious budget ever, the highest ever, and with a big deficit. So then I wondered, how is the government planning to foot the bills? Actually, the 3.3 is a target, and currently, like in 2024 to 25, KRA hit 2.8. So see again, no, it hit 2.5 against the target of 2.8. Now, the new target is 3.3. Possibility of KRA hitting it, slim. So what means is the deficit is growing, it's gonna grow, which means we're gonna borrow more, and that means basically if you're competing with government, you'll always be the loser when it comes to accessing credit. The banks will always put their money where the risk of default or not payment is low. As much as at this time, maybe there's an aspect of risk when it comes also to government securities. So, of course, now you're driving the private sector to a place where there's no capital, there's no cash. Most businesses, cash is king. Actually, cash is king in a business. So, if you're not generating enough cash, whether in revenue or you cannot fund your business in loans, that means that you're going to have a very big problem. I have heard of many stories of many businesses that have actually closed down, and not that they do not have a history of trading and profit making, they just cash was squeezed out of them. So you realize I cannot foot my operational expenses 1 month, 2 months. By the time I'm month 12, I just have to close this business down. It's not that the business model is not working. It's just I supplied to people, they haven't paid me. The people who haven't paid me, they probably supplied to somebody else, supplied to government. Government has not paid. If you look at the pending bills for government, shock. Like even government is not able to pay its own bills, and that trickles down to even the employee. No, I do not have a disposable income. If I do not have enough disposable income, I won't also buy from the mama mboga and from the shop next. So it just trickles down everywhere. And since we already know that it's going to happen, and there's going to be a smaller, as much as the CBK is doing all it can, it's lowering the lending rate. It's at 9.25 right now. So even though the base lending rate for CBK is low and the interest rates the banks have probably come down, still they're still competing with government. So the CBK has lowered the rates, but the bank will still rather go with buying government securities for its investments rather than if I was treasury, yeah, probably I still need to buy. I still need to borrow from the banks because yeah, I'm cash strapped. I have a budget of 4.2. How do I fund it? I probably still borrow internally the 800. But what I do with the banks is I will give them such a tax incentive they can't resist for giving private sector funding. So I'd make them rethink their strategy. I'd make them think if I get this tax incentive because I have invested in whatever, real estate, healthcare, whatever, um, uh, then maybe I'd rather give to the private sector rather than, uh, or, um, so tax incentives can help to get the financials, give investors a tax incentive. The goal is to bring in the money. So whatever, how do you bring in the money? Financial institutions, investors, these are the people who make the money move. They are the custodians of the money. So they would make the money move. So, and if they move the money and lock it up in government securities, not good for us. Just good for me if I buy the securities, the if I decide to buy. But if I can give them incentives that would be so good as to create a situation where they're thinking maybe I should lend out more so that I can get this tax incentive, or as for an investor to think, let me bring in the money to the country, let me set up in Nairobi because I get XYZ and then I get to inject the money here. So it will have a multiplier effect on the economy and things will move. The, you just need to get people to bring in the money and to get the money moving in the private sector, MSMEs, because those are the ones that drive. Yeah, we have a couple of blue chip, they're the biggest taxpayers, but those blue chips, if we were to go blue chips versus every other person combined, so if we were to combine the power of both, then even Kerry would surpass its records in terms of tax collection. So that's one thing when it comes to getting access to capital and credit. Another thing would be if government would slow down in its expenditure booming. So we have new state departments now. We do not know exactly what they will do, but we are yet to get to know. There's so much duplication of tasks, duplication of roles in government, which creates inefficiencies. The CS said about a zero-based budgeting system. For a zero-based budgeting system, you have to justify your expense. It doesn't. It You start from zero, and then I say I really need a car, and ask me why. And then I tell you because I need to provide a service to this community, and this car is critical for the provision of the service. I ask you which type of car. You tell me a Range Rover. I tell you no. You don't need a Range Rover. You need something else. A much lower car, you know. And then and then you say fine. Let's allocate 5 million from my initial budget of maybe I had budgeted for 15M on the car. I justify it, ask questions, I justify, we cut until we reach 5 million. So that's zero-based budgeting. I have to justify every project. But if we are to justify every project that is under that budget, I don't think we would get to 4.2 trillion. So I don't think, maybe they've started the zero-based budgeting system, but the budget that was presented, I don't think they were full-blown using that method. Otherwise, we would have a really lean budget, because most of the projects in Kenya, you will not have a justifiable reason for them, and you will not be able to justify the heightened costs. I would ask you, why is that so expensive?
Why is a wheelbarrow costing 3 million?
Exactly. And then I tell you, no, a wheelbarrow costs 10 G's. Something like that, yeah.
All right, so there are two aspects we want to talk about here. The first one is there is For example, if I am having less money, um, before, as we were beginning the show, I was talking about you're having a salary of 50,000, your rent is 60,000, you have debts of 40,000, and then all of this, the remaining 50,000, you're supposed to like fund it from other lending from other people also. So, how about what is the best way for Kenya to deal with the problem of, because our biggest allocation are to sectors that are not generating income. Like for example, to paying pending bills, to paying salaries, they're not generating income, and that takes the lion's share of our budget. So what can our government do in order to, uh, come up with a way that our budget is generating income as well? Because if we keep funding projects that like funding debts, like 70% of our budget is funding debts and funding bills, and we'll keep sinking deeper and deeper. So what can we do as a country to better this?
Well, again, cut the spending. We are running on I borrow to, there are many holes, so I dig another hole to fill this one. I have a new hole. I have to dig another one to fill this one. That's how we are running currently. But it has to be consistent fiscal discipline in terms of spending, and then there has to be very deliberate strategy on how do you multiply the resources, how do you grow the economy, because you're trying to generate more with very little input. As you say, the 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 sectors that got the lion's share is education. So consumer sectors, it's when, I'm not saying education, it has its returns, but you'll see the returns 30, 20 years from now. The payback period is really high.
Do you even see the returns? Because those people who go to school right now on the street.
Yeah, you said, no, that's another question again. So the payback period for some sectors is very long. So essentially, it's a consumer sector. What then happens, it's like paying bills, right? But if I put my money into manufacturing, into agriculture, it will generate a product or a service that the country can sell, export or internally, and then money is generated, a job is created. What that means is the economy is growing, GDP is growing. So if no money is put, or a little money is put there, that means you cannot grow the economy as fast as you want it to grow. If you're demanding a lot more money from the same economy, and then you're borrowing a lot more to fund the deficits for that economy, and the deficits will go into funding again consumer bills, paying bills, and all that. So it's a big problem, and government has to be really strategic, thinking about how they will cut costs, really cut costs, like really, and that requires a lot of goodwill from government. We don't see that right now. It's really hard. But the one thing maybe that I liked was the e-procurement, because maybe it will cut corruption. Maybe. Because people cut corners. If in the e-procurement portal there will be a ceiling, let's go back to the example used on wheelbarrows. So somebody puts up a tender on wheelbarrows. The state department that puts that up, they have to put a ceiling of the price. So I do not come with a tender that says one wheelbarrow is 3M. Like the e-procurement will not even accept it. So if we have such where they can cap ceiling, so say in this tender we are tendering for wheelbarrows and we are not accepting, and there's a cap, there's a ceiling for pricing. Having factored your profit margins, we are not like saying you don't make profit, but make reasonable, not corrupt profits. Yeah.
Okay, time is really not on our side, but I wanted a quick response as you give your closing remarks. Just a quick one. How do you think, we have had our budget, we've also had our finance bill, how we're going to collect, funds to fund our budget, but then there is this development. the Israel-Iran war, how do you think it's going to affect our economy, and do you think we are ready, even as you give your closing remarks?
Okay, are we ready? I don't think so. Um, well, maybe you can say we have more allocations to the Defense Department, as much as I don't think that was the reasoning behind it. Um, we are in a NATO ally, so at some point we may be required to put in resources. If this we pray it does not go full blown war, but if it does, there's a chance we will be required to contribute resources, either military or financial, to the war. So when it comes to global trade, of course, there's interruption of supply chains. So things like oil, critical things that affect the cost of every other thing, energy, those oil, petroleum, if they're affected, every other thing just goes up. Uh, Generally, for a global economy to be okay, we need to have good trading, easy trading among all countries. So if we are divided in terms of we are in this block or that block, means I cannot trade in other countries. I cannot travel. Like at many sectors, tourism, exports. So if my exports are hindered, we have a greater deficit balance of trade, which means that's even worse for our economy. Our reserves, foreign reserves, they start depleting. So a lot of things will go wrong. So we hope the war does not
Affect us that much.
yeah,
All right.
we
Or
really hope it
escalate.
stops. Yeah, yeah, we hope it does not escalate at all. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Monica, for making time for us this morning.
Thank you.
Our time is we had a lot to discuss today, but time is really not on our side. That has been on the launch with Monica, discussions around the finance bill and budget, if we are really living within our means. And did you say goodbyes? No, you didn't.
Maybe to say that let's be careful tomorrow. I hope the police do not use excessive force. Government should consider training the police on how to deal with
Public.
the public without hurting them. Don't use live bullets. Yeah, it should be basics. Don't use live bullets on people. If anything, arrest and train in court. If anything,
Basic training, you say.
basic training.
All right, this is the launch, and coming up next is a discussion that will be revolving around the state of our nation. That is newspaper review. We'll be joined by Dennis Kimani, who is CEO, Youth Green Society, and also will be joined by Glenn Karani, who is KUSA president. So much to talk about this morning. If you're active on social media, you know what is coming up next in the next